Hi, I'm retired NYPD Detective Vic Ferrari, and welcome to NYPD Through the Looking Glass podcast, where you'll get unique insight into the New York City Police Department. Before we get started, I encourage you to check out my Amazon author page, where you'll find my series of behind-the-scenes NYPD books. The $10 paperback, $2.99 ebook download, including my latest and greatest, NYPD Laughing in the Line of Duty. Speaking of authors, today's guest has quite the resume. Kevin Hallinan began his NYPD career in 1961 and worked on some of the most famous cases in NYPD history involving the infamous Harlem's Purple Gang, the FALN, Weather Underground, Jewish Defense League, United Freedom Front, and the Black Liberation Army. After leading the Bronx 8th Homicide Division and Joint Terrorist Task Force, Kevin retired from the NYPD and became director of Major League Baseball. He's written a great book, Over the Wall, From the Dangerous Streets of New York City Through the Birth of Counterterrorism Beyond. It's available on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and where other books are sold. And I have to tell you, every interview I do with a cop or a retired NYPD member, I read their book. And this one I could not put down. It's got everything in it, and we're going to get to that. But Kevin, thank you so much for doing this interview. Welcome to the show, and please tell us a little about yourself.
Vic, thank you very much. You know, it was interesting when you were going through that group of people that I was involved in investigations with. One of the groups that you left out, and I think you read about it in a book, and that was the Young Lords.
Yes.
In East Harlem, where I got into the middle of a situation, making an arrest on 111th Street, a narcotics complaint, which wasn't surprising in East Harlem,
Right.
And went into a doorway and ended up with a drug dealer throwing drugs all over the place like Christmas. The Young Lords, when I came out, had encircled my partner who was outside standing by our car, and ended up in a tussle with them. He got hit over the head with a 2x4, knocked to the ground, and I had a death grip on my arrestee, and they started throwing kicks, and it got crazy. But New York City Fire Department happened to be up the block doing an inspection, and they came to the rescue just like the cavalry. But that was that was the one group that you left out. So I did get them on my list, unfortunately.
You started your career, though, originally in the Manhattan's Upper West Side, correct, on the 20 precinct?
Yes, sir.
What was that like back then, the neighborhood?
Well, I tell you what, it was. I didn't realize it then, but I certainly do now, that it was an outstanding place to break in. There was the rich, the poor, and unfortunately, plenty of crime as well. So you could have different areas that the rich and the famous were there, and you ran into a lot of those people. And then you were into transient hotels, and where drugs were prevalent, and guns. And we had a sector, my partner and I, eventually up in the 80s, and there was plenty of action on every tour. 84th Street, of course, at that time was the worst street in the city. 4 police officers assigned to each block, and 2 radio cars, one on Columbus, one on Amsterdam. It was unbelievable. The Daily News did a whole expose on it, and the only way they could eventually cure it, and it took a few years to do, was they flattened just about every building on a block and built a high school, Brandeis High School, on one side of the street, and a public school on the other side of the street. So they couldn't cure it, so they knocked it down.
You know, it's funny today. Everybody thinks of the Upper West Side as cafe bars and Seinfeld, and it wasn't that way when you came on the job in the 60s and 70s.
That's for sure. There were some terrific police officers there, and it was an interesting tour. I learned a lot. As you know, as a rookie, when you come in, it's quiet time. There are not too many people chatting with you. I came there by myself. I was assigned there from my class, just me, and some people thought this guy's from my AD or whatever. You know, it took a while, but again, from doing jobs, whether it was a mental situation with a citizen or an arrest situation. I think, mention a book about coming out of the station house, and there's about 20 police officers chasing a guy up the street, and I joined the chase, and I noticed, I knew I had pretty good speed. I ran track at Rice High School, and I got to the lead, and the next thing I knew, I had my hands on the guy, and I had my first arrest. I realized some weeks later that the senior police officers decided let the kid do the work, and I ended up in court, and I missed my graduation from the police academy because I was spending a day in court with this first arrest. So it was a lesson learned.
You were always a go-getter, and you made a lot of arrests, and then you became an investigator. Could you tell the story how you wound up in Brooklyn and then later Manhattan's 2-5 precinct?
Yes, I was in uniform, myself and my partner, who I had an outstanding partner, Hank Buck, and we ended up making a lot of arrests, and we'd go down for interviews for plainclothes, and we elected not to accept the assignments to plainclothes because of some concerns. And so we stayed in uniform, and we started going to school, which was good, both studying for promotion and college. I got started with Fordham University. Anyway, it took a number of years, but eventually I got the call, thanks really to my young brother who was in the detective bureau 2 years before me. He had the combat car and a 3.0 and made all kinds of arrests, was a tremendous police officer. That's who the book should have been about. But anyway, Brooklyn. I lived in Rockland County. I didn't know whether it was a promotion or a demotion. One guy in Rockland County, I understand, was also got the assignment and turned it down because he realized what the commute would be like and making arrests and working 6 to 2s. It was about 5 to 6 months of coming home after 6 to 2. Generally, always made an arrest. That's why we were out there. That's doing investigations. We were the nighttime Detective Bureau Nighttime Neighborhood Task Force. Put that on your collar. It was unbelievable. There were about 15 of us, all high arrest officers from all over the city, and I would make an arrest, shoot home, get home about 3:15 in the morning. I get 2 hours sleep and then shoot back and be in Brooklyn Court, which you may know was a nightmare. And 6 months of that, and then another reward came. 2-5 squad in East Harlem. Well, I went to school, Rice High School, which was just a couple of blocks away. But anyway, that turned out to be, again, there were some really good detectives and people there. And I was, again, aggressive and loved the job. And of course, being in the Bureau was the biggest thing to eventually get that gold shield. But I got, as I should have expected, involved in some serious situations while I was there. I do remember one story I share with you. I don't know if I mentioned in the book. A woman came into the detective squad and had her grandmother's ring was stolen in a burglary. She had lived in a precinct at that time, so she wanted somebody like me, to go out to the pawn shops and see if we could find it. So I elected to go with her, and I went to 2 or 3, no luck. But in the 4th one, she found the ring. And the pawnbroker said, okay, all right, let's go. He says, all right. So started making out the forms. He says, detective, I need your name and badge. I said, excuse me. I says, I'm a White Shield. He looked at me. You're not a detective? I said, no, I'm a police officer. And the woman looked at me like, who are you? Are you an imposter or something? I tried to explain to the guy, I'm a White Shield detective and all that kind of stuff. Well, eventually we got the ring back, but it was kind of embarrassing. It took almost 2 years to get, I think 17 months or something like that, to get the gold shield.
Can you tell the story? So you're in the 2-5 squad, and your first homicide is a ground ball where you follow. Could you tell that story? Because I laughed so hard when I heard that story.
Well, I had a detective, quite honestly, he was the guy. When I first got assigned to the 2-5 squad, I went to the precinct in my Sunday go-to-meeting clothes, looking good. I had a nice briefcase and walked into the 2-5, which was probably built during the Civil War. The desk lieutenant never said, yeah, upstairs. And I went upstairs. I didn't think I was going to make it because they were so creaky that I didn't know if... Anyway, I get to the top. And I walk into the detective squad, and there's about 6, 7 locals sitting there with a squadron of flies over their head. It was red hot. I'll never forget. It was really warm in that room. And there's a heavy-set detective, two-finger in a typewriter, and I walk in, and he kind of looks up, and he sees me, and unfortunately believed I was somebody of importance, which wasn't true. And he said, "Step in." He got up, and he opened the gate. He said, "Yes, sir, what can I do for you?" And I said, "I'm Kevin Hallinan." I said, and I reached into my pocket, and I took out my white shield. And as soon as I took out that white shield, he looked at me like, "Who the hell are you?" He thought I was important because of the briefcase and the suit and the tie.
You're a big guy.
Oh, yeah. So he says, "Stay here." And he gets up and he walks into the lieutenant's office, detective lieutenant, and I can see the shoes up on the desk in his office. And I hear him shout, "Well, find out who the hell he is." And this guy comes out, kind of embarrassed. And when I tell him, he says, "Take a seat over there with the crew, with the squadron of flies going over their head. I'm on the end of the bench." I might add, the best dressed guy on the end of that bench. Eventually got in to see the lieutenant who took his feet off the desk and turned out to be a good guy. And that was how I got started. And then that heavy-set detective turned out to be my partner. And we went out one morning on a homicide. It was on 128th Street, never forget it, between Lexington and Park Avenue. We walked there, nobody around. It's like 8 o'clock in the morning, and a police officer is there with a body covered in the street, and there's a lot of blood. And I'm just looking around, looking for evidence of some kind, and my partner is talking with the police officer, and I see the blood, and I start to track the blood. I said, "Wait a second." I start walking with the blood. I walk up onto the curb. On the curb, and I look on the staircase. There's more blood. I says, "Oh my God, look at this." So I just kept going, and I go in, and I go up one flight of stairs, and it goes right to an apartment. I couldn't believe this. So I rap on the door. Well, fortunately, the white shield didn't make a difference at that time. She said, "What do you want?" And I said, "Some blood here." "Yeah, that man." And she started cursing about apparently this guy that she had an issue with. "That son of a bitch," going on and on. And I said, I think you need to come with me. Surprisingly, she came. We went down the stairs, and we walked back to where my partner's still BSing with the uniform officer. And I said, Tom, I think I got your perp here." And he looks at me, and she says, "I would have killed him a second time, blah, blah, blah." And she starts in. Well, my senior partner was not happy that this raw rookie had come on the scene and made the arrest within minutes. So a rough start, but again, we became real good friends going on.
As a young investigator, you catch a homicide case that would change your outlook on the NYPD department. Could you go into that a little bit?
Well, what happened was I had been in court all day. Sergeant Al Robinson, I'll never forget Al, good man. And he came over to me and says, "Kev, it would be okay if you'd come in and do a night duty tonight." 3:30 in the morning, police officers requiring a detective, 117 at First Avenue. We get over there, and right on the corner, right next to a sewer, there was a lot of blood. And they said, "Oh, they took the guy to the hospital." He said, "I think he's dead." So we left that scene and went to Metropolitan Hospital and got there, and there were 2 police officers at the hospital. The 2 officers, that I was trying to get some information from what they knew. "Hey, look, we just responded. One guy was sitting in the car. His other partner was in getting coffee. He said, heard shots a block away." The coffee shop was on 116th and 1st. A delightful coffee shop. It was well known in East Harlem. And this is, 3:15 in the morning. Partner's in getting coffee. He's sitting behind the wheel. He sees a car, hears the shots. He got about a half a block from the car, and the car made a quick right on 118th Street. And by the time he turned into 118th Street, the car had already disappeared from 118th and was gone up Pleasant Avenue. And he said, that's all. And it was kind of very quick, like they were angry that I was questioning him. And the other guy said, oh, I didn't see anything. I was in the coffee shop. He said, well, I circled the block a couple of times looking for the car, but I didn't see it. And that was it. And I said, not much to go on. So that morning, I was still working, and it was like, I guess, 8:30, 9 o'clock. I'm sitting at the typewriter, again, exhausted because I hadn't gotten any sleep the night before. And I had to do what they call an unusual for the chief of detectives, explaining a homicide, what had taken place. Next thing I look up and I see one of the cops that was involved in this. He wasn't in the original car of the two officers. He apparently had come on the scene, I didn't know this, but apparently he had interest in this case. But he was always a ball buster if he took a thing about me being, a white shield and up with the detectives and, you're going to be a second grader and all this.
Breaking your balls.
Yeah. I'm typing away, and he comes up right next to where the desk where I'm typing, and he says, hey, hotshot, you going to break this case? You're going to be the man? And I had just about had enough. I was really tired. I shut the typewriter, I pushed it aside, and I looked at him and pointed like right in his chest. I says, you can bet your ass I'm going to solve this case. And God is my judge. He stopped talking. He turned almost white in the face, and he backed away from me. And he backed into the gate as you come into the squad, and with his other hand was able to release it and turned and walked out. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, what did I say? What? And the other detectives weren't paying a hell of a lot of attention to it. And I finished the unusual, grabbed my coat or whatever, and I got in my car, and I had a 30-mile drive in front of me. And the whole time in my mind, I'm saying, what happened? What did I say? I figured, I'm so damn tired. I'm just imagining it. It didn't all happen that way. And I'm trying to put it out of my mind. And I did for a period of time. But what happened was, as I started to get into this case, and I really got into it, I was spending so many hours getting different detectives to go to Pleasant Avenue with me and into the bars, etc., leaving my card, which they threw on the floor. Eventually, as I'm working, the other two that were in the car, again, they barely would talk to me. And I knew this guy that had backed away from me in the 2-5 squad and, was busting my chops. He had a partner in the car, and he was working that night. And I went to go near his partner, and he was disappearing. He had nothing to do with me. So, obviously I felt the intrigue in the case, and I would go back to the scene every night that I was working on that same night, starting from 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'd get one of the partners I was working with to be with me and see who possibly might be out there, whether it's a delivery man or somebody going to work or whatever. And it took about a month and a half, and I found this young guy, young Puerto Rican kid, who was, I think he almost walked up to me because I was probably the only guy in the street. And I got to talking to him, and he had seen the shooting. He was coming up on 17th Street between Pleasant and First Avenue. He was about halfway up the block when the two guys from Pleasant Avenue came flying by him, and he saw the guy running up ahead and the car giving chase. And he slowed up and he saw the driver get out of the car and fire the shots. He was now some distance away. He probably couldn't identify if he had to, but he saw the shots. And the next question, of course, I asked him, what about the police? What about the police car? Did you see a police car? He said the police car, when that car went out onto First Avenue, the police car was almost tailgating the car he was chasing. They went around onto 118th Street. I said, the car was that close? He says he was on his bumper. Well, obviously,
Right.
that changed everything. And what happened was, again, I was new in the squad. I was working with a team of guys who, quite honestly, weren't happy that I was there. I had had nobody to talk to about this case except the squad commander. And Vic, I'm not going to mention his name because I had great respect and admiration for this guy. And I was keeping him up to speed, like weekly sit down. I'd go in and say, "Well, here's where I'm going," etc., etc. Just kind of to get direction at the same time, because he had been a detective for a lot of years, and he was a very popular guy. So I'm laying it out to him to say, well, I go in after I get this story from the kid. I guess it was the next day or a couple of days. As soon as we worked together, I was in talking to him, closed door, and he said, and he just sat back in his chair, and his facial expression changed, and he says, "Kev, this is unbelievable. This is serious." I said, "I know it's serious." He said, "I got to think about this." And I left his office. And that next meeting, he says to me, "Kev, I talked with my hook in the police department, and I'm getting transferred. I'm leaving. My guys telling me this thing is going to blow up, and I'm going to be a casualty in it. So, I wish you luck and everything like that, but I'm getting out of here."
Yeah, it's not like you had help to begin with. Now, the one guy you thought you could talk to.
Vic, the one guy, I felt like I was in a battle zone, and all of a sudden the company commander turns to me, "I'm out of here." And he left. And the guy who was in the car with the guy Patty McGooey was the police officer in the car sitting in front of the delightful coffee shop that gave chase, okay? The other cop was in there, Al, I lost his last name, but he was in the coffee shop. McGooey had Alphonse Siska and Arnold Squitieri at gunpoint sitting in the car with the police car behind it with the light and all, and ordering them to get out. The real bad guy, this whole thing, the worst of the crew, pulls up in the car. He jumps out. His partner stays in the car. He jumps out, and he sees it's Squitieri, whom he knows, uses the words, "He's good people." And McGooey puts his gun away. His words apparently with Squitieri and Siska, "We'll see you later." And they drive away.
And that was Arnold Squitieri, who later became head of the Gambino crime family.
Correct. And his right-hand man, Alphonse Siska. And they drove, the
cops stopped him and they let him go.
Yeah, they let him go. And during the night, Alphonse Siska and Arnold Squitieri put $3,000 to $4,000 in the back of their police car.
To let him go for a homicide.
McGooey would have had the arrest of the year. It would have been an outstanding arrest. He sold out. And the worst thing for me, quite honestly, was not only Desiderio Caban, that was the person who was killed, who was a minor drug dealer in the garment district, was doing a drug thing, and apparently bought some from Squitieri and held off paying him. And he apparently walked he was in the bar, and Squitieri and Siska came in on Pleasant Avenue, and he saw him, and he bolted. And they ran out, got in the car, and chased him down. The worst part about it, of course, is that there was another piece to it. That, if I mentioned, the officer, John, I'm losing his name too, who said he's good people, his partner stayed in the car. His partner didn't want any part of it. His hair turned completely white over the next month, month and a half. Completely white.
I've
He
seen that
wasn't
happen to
acting.
people.
I'm sorry?
I've seen that happen to cops where they've been in something traumatic or something really bothers them. In a month, just like you said, they go white. Their hair turns white.
That's what happened with him. At this time, too, unknown to me, Bill Phillips, who became a very famous Knapp Commission witness, who did a lot of television time after that. And he was a real piece of work, very, very sharp, unfortunately. Had been in plain clothes and had been around and was dumped back to the 2-5. And they had him in some swindle, and they, Knapp Commission, wired him up. Phillips had been bragged to by the police officers that were working that case or were involved in that homicide. Particularly, again, the lead guy was bragging about how much money they made, and Phillips kept edging him on, asking for more. Come on, share it with me. And he told him that they made a nice score. And over a series of conversations, and I didn't find this out till very much later, well, Phillips is getting more and more information. He asked the police officer who's doing all the bragging, how much did that detective upstairs get? And he said, don't tell that guy, he'll lock us all up.
Bill Phillips, one of the infamous guys in the Knapp Commission case, saved you.
Yeah, he eventually was arrested for a homicide involving a prostitution case. That's a whole other story.
Let me just stop you there for a second because, so as a young cop, I'm in narcotics. I'm going down to Manhattan Criminal Court a lot. And when you get into the elevator at Manhattan Criminal Court, they've got posters of big cases that the Manhattan DA's office had done decades earlier. And I'll never forget, there was a poster of Bill Phillips, and I didn't know who he was, and it just said something about, he was a detective or a lieutenant?
No, he was a white shield.
Okay, so it said
He had been
Patrolman
in
Bill
plain
Phillips.
clothes. He got dumped from plain clothes and then got sent to the 2-5 precinct, where he got involved in a number of corrupt activities, and eventually the Knapp Commission grabbed him, and he ended up as their key witness.
Well, they had a poster of him, and it was almost like a deterrent, like, don't let this happen to you. And I didn't know who Bill Phillips was, and I forgot about it. I'm reading your book. The name comes up again. So I start researching Bill Phillips, and then, like you said, he's involved in a double homicide in a brothel, and he winds up doing 35 or 40 years in jail, and then he finally gets parole. I think he died about 10 years ago, like into his 90s, but to this day, he swears, I did all these things. He says, I didn't kill those people.
He's dead now, but you're right. He lived till his 90s, and he was, if you will, the jailhouse lawyer all that time. See, I was working very close with the Rackets Bureau boss, Ken Comboy, and John Justy was the detective that was involved in the Phillips case and made that case, because that happened while I was there. And Phillips alleged he didn't do it, but I had interviewed Phillips because while I was doing the investigation, and once I identified Squitieri and Siska, I found out that Phillips actually arrested Squitieri for an assault. So I had Phillips come up to the squad, and I interviewed him, and, you know.
And at some point you work in this case where it becomes obvious to you that there's cops involved in this homicide, that they let the bad guy go. And in your book, which, I mean, it's a great book, there's a story that you come into work one day, and there's two gangsters from Pleasant Avenue sitting up in the detective squad that want to talk to you. It sounds like something out of a Hollywood movie.
Absolutely, and as I mentioned, I was kind of the Lone Ranger to a certain degree. And when I walked in to do a night duty, one of the detectives says, hey, there's two guys in the back room who want to talk to you. So the back room was only a place where police officers who were stopping by or detectives would be there. Civilians wouldn't be in that back room. So I walked back there, and it turns out that the owner of the restaurant on Pleasant Avenue, it's still there, 113, 112th Street, The name is leaving me for the moment.
Not Rayo's, Patsy's?
No, not Patsy's. Patsy's was famous. That's another
Rayo's?
story than Patsy's. Rayo's. Vincent Rayo is in the back room, and he's with a well-known drug dealer who was a Pleasant Avenue guy. They end up getting killed on Pleasant Avenue. Fats Inglisi, that's what his name was. So I walk in, and Rayo's sitting at a desk there. He's in shirt and tie and, $300 suit or whatever, with this stern look on his face. And Iglesi's like standing next to him, now leaning on a desk. And I walk around the desk, and Rayo looks me in the eye and says, "You're making trouble for friends of ours. And, this is not good. We don't need troubles like this. And it's important that we come and we speak with you about this. It's very serious." And next thing, Fats Inglisi, leans over the table and says, "Kid, this case is worth telephone numbers to you." And I step back, and I look at Inglisi, and I look at Rayo. I said, "The only thing I want out of this case is Arnold Squateri and Al Francisca in this squad room to be fingerprinted and taken down to court and be arraigned for homicide." And they're looking at me. Rayo's face expression never changed. And I said, "That's all I want, except I want you two to get the fuck out of here." And they got up, and Rayo led the walkaway out into the squad room. And Fats Inglisi is kind of, giving the walk and looking around like, he's king of the kingdom. So as he's going out just taking his time, I helped him speed it up a little because I gave him a kick in the ass. And out they went. And Vic, in those days, you didn't go to IAD or wherever. I just got robbed. You just, like it never happened. You just go and do your job. That's what you do. Well, what happened was, the next day or a day later, it's in a book, The First Grade Detective, a terrific guy. They used to call him Tex. Peterson was his last name. And he used to wear cowboy boots, and he had this big buckled belt. It's slim. He was an older guy, first grader. Had a tremendous reputation as a detective. Very, very well respected. A man of a few words. Well, I came into work. He was just getting off duty. And as I walk into the squad, he says, "Kevin, I want to talk with you." Which was really surprising because you barely got a hello. So we go in the back room, and he closes the door. And he says, "You got a very serious problem." He said, "You're dealing with very dangerous people. This thing can go sideways on you." And he said, "You have to decide what you're going to do and how you're going to handle it. I'm not giving you any advice, but I'm giving you a warning. It's not a good situation." And he turned around, and I before he left, I said, "Tex," I says, "I'm the police officer here." He says, "Kev, you're a good guy, and I don't want to see you hurt." And he walked out. And I'm thinking to myself, my God, what have I gotten myself into? Where do I? There's nobody to talk to. The squad commander is gone. He's transferred. Thank God, Vic. I had the most wonderful wife, the girl across the street, who just never asked any of me just to be a good husband and father. She never put any pressure on me, never called the office of the precinct, bring me home a container of milk or whatever. She never did. She just knew that I was really committed to the job, committed to her for sure, and to my family. And I have to tell you, and I think I say it in the book, I knew where the local churches were that I would stop in and just say a quick prayer, looking for to make sure that I didn't drown in this thing. The newspapers apparently got hold of this. There was headlines all over, and it started to leak about the cops possibly being involved. And I got word, actually through my brother, that IAD was looking to talk to me, but weren't going to come near me because they figured I'd lawyer up and there'd be more issues for them. So they weren't going to touch me. I heard that the NAP Commission also was looking at me. They figured that I got a piece of the pie. That's why that case never went, because the detective got his. Well, I was studying, as I studied the whole time in the job, and at one of the promotion schools, and I ran into a young police officer who I had worked with 2 or 3 years in the 20th precinct, and he was a terrific cop, and he knew that me and my partner were just straight business, because unfortunately there were some others that were doing business. But I saw him there, and he had been transferred to IAD about a year before. I said, I need to talk to you. So after the class was over, I said, look, I think IAD may be looking to talk to me. And he says, Kev, believe me, I heard your name, and I told them that, you're straight. You never do anything like, what's being alleged. I said, will you tell IAD that I'll come in and talk to them, and no lawyer, no player, no player rep, I'm going back to baseball, no PBA representative, just me. And I says, I'm ready to go whenever they want to talk to me. Well, I think it was the next day.
Yeah.
I got a call from IAD. They wanted to see me. So I drove out to Popular Street or wherever, or Schermerhorn, whatever the hell street they were located in Brooklyn. Lieutenant Stein, I'll never forget his name, and Sergeant Power were the two. And they were tough. They didn't pull any punches. They grilled me big time. And you know what? I felt good unloaded this, that I finally had somebody to listen to me and maybe at some point believe me. And Stein left the room, and he came back, and he said, they want to talk to you over in the District Attorney's Rackets Bureau. And I remember leaving their offices and going out to their car and sitting in the back seat, headed to the District Attorney's office. And I'm thinking to myself, I feel like a prisoner.
Yeah.
I'm going to get arraigned, And we go up and get to the Rackets Bureau, and they told me, take a seat here, and they go in to talk to the DA, or assistant DA. And I'm sitting there, and I'm, this ever going to end, And they finally give me the signal command. I go in, and I'll never forget, there was a small little guy. I sat down, the sergeant and lieutenant were on each side of me. And he said, I want you to tell me this full story. And I said, oh my God, here we go. So I went through pretty much the whole thing. And he started shooting questions, et cetera, at me. What about this? What about that? And I answered, fully compliant. As he leans into me, he says, you're going to wear a wire, he said, and you're going to go back to the 2-5, both in the precinct and in the detective squad, and you're going to talk with the detectives and the bosses and the cops, and you're going to gather information for us, okay? And then you're going to come back here, and we'll take the wire off, and we'll listen, et cetera, et cetera. This is going to be your job. And I'm sitting, just looking at him, back in my chair, and I leaned in across the desk, and I said, I'll do it. And he kind of brightened up. I said, but I want you to wear a wire, just like me. You wear a wire, then you and I will come back here, because you'll be talking with your attorneys and judges and all the people that you work with, and we'll compare notes. I went back in his chair, and he just stared at me like, this guy's crazy. And I could see out of the corner of my eye the lieutenant from IAD, just a very slight little grin. And I'm thinking, he's thinking either I'm crazy or I got balls.
Or both.
Or both. There was like dead silence in the room. And then next thing he stands up and he says, "We're finished here." And I got up and we walked out. I thought from that period it was going to be over. Not the case. I'm going in to do a day duty at the 4-6, and it's from the Sergeant Powers. And he says, "Kevin, I need you to do a favor. Come direct to the Rackets Bureau." Okay. I hang up the phone. I look at my wife, and she says, "The case?" I said, "Yes." No, she just gave me a hug. I walk into his office, and the sergeant and lieutenant are there, and he's standing, everybody's standing. So I walk into his office, and they introduce me, and he gives me kind of a fish handshake, and he said, "You're going before the grand jury this morning." I looked at him. I said, "Fine." He says, "Let's go." We walk out of his office, and we never sat down. We walked out of his office to the elevator. The elevator door opens at our floor. We had to go 2 floors up to the grand jury. The elevator doors open. Who's on the elevator? The three cops that were involved in the killing, or yes, in the
cover-up.
The Desiderio Caban and the cover-up. The 3 of them are on the elevator. Apparently their attorney was the 4th person on the elevator. I almost thought, how could this ever happen? That we push the elevator button and this elevator stops at this floor, and those 3 and their attorney are on the elevator. It was almost like it was a setup by the Rackets Bureau, to see what would happen. And I got on the elevator, and they got their heads down, and I got on the elevator with the sergeant, lieutenant, and convoy, and we go up. We get into the anteroom before you go into the jury. The lieutenant sergeant says, "Kevin, take a seat over there." So I take a seat, and the 3 officers take a seat up close to where you check in, and the attorney goes up to the person who's taking the information. And next thing, he's talking with them, and he's pointing out the 3 of them. And next thing, they're leaving. The Sergeant Powers was sitting there by. So what's going on? He says, "They're refusing to testify." I said, "Okay." 5 minutes later, Sergeant Kevin Hallinan. I go into the grand jury, and convoy's not there. They had this other attorney, McManus was one of them, and really 2 of them that started cross-examining me. I was cross-examined for probably over an hour. They just put me through the ringer, which was, I was cool. I was fine. Quite honestly, I've testified so much, Vic, that I'm a professional witness. In the sense is, I'm always telling the truth. Next thing, they take a 5-minute break. I go no place but sit in a chair, and they bring in this senior district attorney. He was up in years, but he was a legend in the DA's office. And he was Italian, and a small gentleman, but a real firebrand. And he takes over all questioning. And he has me for probably, I'm going to say 40, 45, 50 minutes, taking me all through, banging away. And he finishes, and they excuse me. And I walk outside, never forget this. I walk outside, and who's standing there but Ken Conboy? And he walks up to me, and he sticks out his hand. He says, "Let's go to work." He went up to his office, and I finally joined the team. And, just an unbelievable day, but certainly a good day. They said, "We're going to assign Deputy Inspector Tom Gleason," who was a senior guy. He had to be close to 60. A little guy, white hair. He was my new partner, and it reminded me of Serpico, because they did the same thing with him. They assigned a deputy inspector to work with him. And I had the same treatment. I'm a sergeant. I'm back in the 2-5 squad as a sergeant, but strictly working this case. I'm in my office at the 2-5 squad when one of the detectives comes in. He says, "Hey, Sarge, there's a call for you." Galena says, "Hey, we want to surrender Squitieri and Siska tomorrow. We'll meet you down in front of 100 Center Street at 10 o'clock. I'll have both of them there for you." I said, "Gino, that's not going to work." "What do you mean?" I said, "I know the deal." I said, "You're going to have a big press conference. You've been having press conferences on this thing. This is going to be showtime." I said, "That's not going to happen." I says, "I want those two guys to come into the 2-5 precinct and surrender. And they'll be brought upstairs and they'll be fingerprinted and we'll do all our forms. And then they'll go in a wagon, in a police patrol wagon to court." Silence. Galena himself was given a pink Cadillac, stretch Cadillac, from some pimp who he was an attorney for, who didn't pay his bills and had his pink Cadillac, and had Squitieri and Siska, because they called me from downstairs, saying, "Kevin, you never believe this. They just arrived with the attorney in his pink Cadillac."
With Mary Kay.
Yeah. So anyway, they came up and we started the process, and I think I put it in the book. At that time, you had the fingerprint ink, and I fingerprinted Squitieri myself, and he had the ink all over his head, so he had the cuffs on. So we go into the men's room so he could wash his hands, and he's washing his hands. He's a big guy, burly, angry, obviously, so he's doing his hands, and I'm kind of leaning over against the wall looking at him. And I'm thinking to myself, this is like 3-4 years this is going on. It's out of my life. And I looked down at him, and I said, "Honey, all this time," or something like that. And he turned around and looked at me as he's scrubbing his hands. He gives me this look. He says, "F you." And I said back, "F me, you're right, Arnie," because I was the only one who cared about this case. And but it's in the book. And it was kind of a moment between me and him, which was kind of interesting, because I took him to court, and I had to arraign him federally first, because he was also indicted by a friend of mine from IRS for multi-million-dollar tax evasion on narcotics. And I had to bring him down into which was it was a small prison that they had over near the West Side Highway downtown, and I had to bring him there, and he had to check in there. And when I came out, there was this blonde standing by the Frankfurter stand. The guy had a wagon, and this blonde, good-looking blonde, throws a Frank down and comes over and gives Arnie a big hug and kiss, etc. And I got him cuffed behind the back, and she's making it, having a good time. And I say, "Arnie, we got to go to court. We got to go to court." "All right, yeah, okay." So he breaks with her, and then we go to 100 Center Street, the back entrance of 100 Center Street. Okay, get out of the car, and there's got to be 6 or 8 Italian relatives, including the parish priest, there as well. And they had
was it Father Gigante?
A meatball sandwich and everything, food and everything to bring in with them.
Was the priest the Father Gigante, the Chin's brother?
I couldn't say. I couldn't say for sure. But there was a guy, what I appeared to be a priest, Roman collar and all. So, but I couldn't say I wasn't thinking about him or anybody else, quite honestly. But what I got a kick out of, here he had his lover on the federal side, and on the state side, he had his wife and family, like he was a hero. I got him in. Ironically, when he was in prison, and he was up in Greenhaven, he got off big time. I think he got 5 years or some crazy thing like that, him and Siska. But he got a pass with prison guards to come back to the Bronx to see some doctor, etc. But the prison guards, the correction guys, were letting him stay in his motel. where he had his lady friend coming to the hotel. Okay, and yeah, he's partying. That was going on with state correction people.
I mean, you bounced around a little bit after the 2-5 squad. You worked in a lot of different places, but there's another wild story from your book, Over the Wall, from the dangerous streets of New York City through the birth of counterterrorism and beyond. You're in the 8th zone in the Bronx, and you're tasked with investigating a double homicide. And in the process of that double homicide, you make an arrest, and then the perp makes bail, and then he's murdered with his girlfriend. Could you go into that story? Because that's an amazing story. That's a fascinating case.
Rowan Zizi was in East Harlem. I guess he was 18, 19, something like that. And he was a wild man. We found out he had killed 2 people in East Harlem because he didn't like them and just had a gun and planned on using it at every occasion. Anyway, he was up in the Bronx, had a girlfriend up in the Bronx, and he was in his car by himself and driving up around, I'm trying to think, Crosby Avenue or somewhere around there.
Tremont and Silver Street?
Yeah, Tremont, around there. He ends up turning the corner real tight, and there's 2 young guys, I think 18, 19, crossing the street, and he almost hits them with the car. They jump out of the way, and they start cursing, yelling at him. And he stops the car short. He comes running back, and he kills the 2 of them. They died. As soon as they took them to the hospital, they were dead, the 2 of them. Give the uniformed police officers credit. They ended up with a description, coming up with them, brought him into the 2-5 detectives, homicide squad. My office, it really wasn't that big. It was pretty tight. Anyway, the detectives come in, and the lead detective starts to question him. And this guy has an attitude. And I'm sitting like right across from him, and I'm looking at him, and I'm looking at his eyes. And as I mentioned to you previously, it was like he didn't have a soul. Just negative, nasty, nothing. Didn't have any regrets or anything like just didn't tell us anything. Just one of the most amazing people. And I interviewed a lot of people, prisoners, people in jail. I mean, all kinds of situations. I never saw anything like Mo Anzizi. And he ended up, he got arrested, charged, etc., was arraigned, and believe it or not, given bail. His father put up a couple of buildings that he owned in the Bronx for his bail, and he was let out. And Zizi, as I said, was dating the girl in the Bronx. Girl just finishing high school. He called her, said he was going to make a run for it, and she begged him not to. And she called his father after speaking with Nzizi and told the father he was going to make a run for it. The father said, hold on to him, take him to Jack Steiner, tell him you'll meet him at Jack Steiner to talk. I'll help you out, I'll work out something. So she did just as instructed. She went to Jack Steiner, she met him. A couple of guys came and joined him. They were members of the so-called Purple Gang in the Bronx, notorious killers, involved in all kinds of criminal activity. Young guys. This was a young group, but dangerous. They were so dangerous that the actual organized crime people were hesitant to get involved in any activity with them, though they did use them, as in this particular case, to deal with the Nzizi. Well, they left Jack Steiner, still talking to him about not making a run. They went up to Orchard Beach, spent an hour or 2 up there, still talking with him in the car with the young woman. And they realized he wasn't buying, and they ended up leaving Orchard Beach, went about a mile on Shore Road, which was between City Island and Orchard Beach, pulled up on the grass, got the 2 of them out of the car, told them to kneel down, and killed the 2 of them. And as I told Vic, and I mentioned in the book, I interviewed a young woman who was living in City Island and worked in the Bronx. She was coming home from work and was driving by across from the location where the car had pulled up on the grass and saw that and Zizi and the girl just starting to kneel down, and she could see the look on the girl's face, the absolute fright, realizing that she was in grave danger. And they put a bullet in the head of each one of them and took off. And there was a tale, of course, about there was a citizen who actually followed the car. It was coming off the grass, got a plate number, and it turned out to be Nzizi's father's car that the Purple Gang were using. And to my dissatisfaction and the disappointment of others, we were not able to make a case on it, and to some degree, the responsibility of the Bronx DA, who refused to give us a grand jury to pursue it further. I had the unfortunate responsibility of, with my detective partner, meeting with the mother to tell her that we were not going to be able to make an arrest. It was a tragic case. They still think of that young woman today.
Who was the Bronx DA at the time, Marola?
He deserved. I'm sorry?
Who was the Bronx DA at the time that wouldn't give you the grand jury,
I
Marola?
believe it was Mario Marola. It was what I called, tried to make a deal because they were looking for an accommodation on having a DA come to the homicide squad before we made the final arrest on these homicide suspects. And I had spoken with the chief of Bronx detectives, and he and the other lieutenants in the 3 homicide squads agreed to do it, but we were looking for an accommodation on this case to give us what I call the last chance grand jury to start bringing people in and put pressure, et cetera, et cetera. And we thought possibly, no surety that it was going to happen, but we felt that someone might give up something more. I met with organized crime leader Paul Castellano to see if I could get his help.
Yeah, could you tell that story, how you reached out to Big Paul Castellano to try to solve this case?
Yeah, actually, first grade detective John Taldone in the 8th Homicide Squad offered, since he had a case with that group and got to know Castellano and felt he could make a call. So he did. I met him in a pet shop in East Harlem, and he was back there, and he was tall Paul, just as they said, and I went into obviously a dramatic story of what had happened and about this young woman and about what the passerby, the citizen, had seen at the scene, and this young woman, what she went through, what her mother, et cetera, almost as a sympathy appeal to Paul Castellano. So Castellano, he listened, he was nodding his head, and I thought, that maybe I was making some progress, and he said, okay, I'll get back to you. And I figured, maybe we have a shot here. I still haven't heard from Paul. Of course, he ended up getting shot and killed a couple of years later.
And around that time, I grew up in Throgs Neck, and I didn't realize these things were going on because I was a little young. But in 1983, you were involved you were in the Joint Terrorist Task Force. You got involved in a shootout attempting to capture, you captured them, a dangerous group of gun runners that were coming up south that thought that they were going to meet with a terrorist organization, which was actually the JTTF, and you actually nabbed them in the Whitestone Capri Motel. Could you tell that story?
Yeah, what happened was we had gotten word that there had been a major burglary down in South Florida where a gun owner's house, a very wealthy gun owner, had a whole collection of guns. I think there were over probably 30 different weapons that were taken, ammunition, everything. And this group was looking to sell what they had stolen. And they reached out to some people in the Bronx about possibilities, and one of them was a source, if you will, of one of the detectives on the terrorist task force, Sam Parola by name. And Sam came to me and told me the whole story. He says this group still has everything they stole, and they're looking to come up north and sell it. They're looking for like $30,000. He said, what do you think? I said, fine. I said, hey, I think this is the case we should get involved with. And I went to the assistant director that I was working with, Ken Walton, who was one of the best FBI agents they ever had. A terrific guy, terrific boss. Ken Walton agreed, and he says, put together a final plan and let me know how you're going to accomplish it. I said, fine. We put together a team of FBI agents, et cetera, et cetera. We had several meetings and planning how we were going to do this, and we set up the Bronx Whitestone Motel as the site where all this would happen. And it'd be during the week, it'd probably be pretty quiet up there. What we did was we had very discreetly policed the area. I think we did it on a Wednesday. We kind of looked at the week before on a Wednesday at the time we were going to do it, and it was very quiet at the motel. We looked at the parking lot and everything and took pictures, and then with our team, we probably had about 15, maybe 20 agents and detectives that were going to be part of this. The plan was we sent in 2 or 3 agents, female as well as male, as couples to the motel and checked in, as if they were guests, et cetera, and also made sure they got rooms overlooking the parking lot so that they would be able to see everything that goes on and, if needed, join the party. I went into the local precinct. I met with the captain. This is several days before it was going to go down, with my agent counterpart, and explained to the captain exactly what the plan of action was. These people were going to have guns, ammunition, and there could be trouble. And what I would like to do is to have the sector cars in the area fully aware at the time, In fact, once we spotted their vehicle, we wanted the sector cars, they'd know in advance that this was going to go down around a particular time, that they stay vigilant, so that everybody was in tune. And sure enough, we got set up in the area. I stayed just in we had more vans than we ever need, but we probably had 5 or 6 vans up there. And what we did was we positioned the vans around the parking lot. And I didn't want them to get into the motel. I wanted it all to take place in the parking lot. So we got all positioned. My cohort in the NYPD helicopter gave us the signal that their van just came off the highway. Looks like they're headed onto the Hutchinson River Parkway, et cetera, et cetera. We had pictures of the van. Everything is going according to script at this point in time. What happened was they ended up moving to 1 or 2 different spots once they got into the lot. They parked it here, then they pulled it out, they went to another spot. So once they settled and shut their engine off, and we were ready, from my point, I said, take them. And with that, our guys were in their vans, came in at different angles to trap them. The helicopter was over the top saying, the whole thing. And this guy in the front seat, who we had heard, said he wasn't going to be taken alive if the police try to apprehend him. Fortunately, he didn't pull out a BAR, which they had. He pulled out a Derringer and fired 1 shot through the windshield at this FBI agent who's got a Remington shotgun trained on him. He fires, I think, he just got 1 or 2 shots off. Whatever FBI agent blasted through, hit him. We didn't know what the other, my guy that I was with, I ran across with my partner, and he went to the back window, and before they could go for guns, he fired a shotgun blast through the back window. There were 34 shots fired in the shootout. The gentleman who fired the first shot, he got seriously wounded. We had him removed from the van into the police helicopter, direct to the hospital. We saved his life. And we recovered all the guns, all the ammunition, etc., etc. Oh, by the way, when I first became the CEO of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, again, it was in the early stages. The task force had been formed maybe less than a year before. I requested and received permission to get all my police officers, detectives, sworn in as deputy U.S. Marshals. So therefore, they had the ability to travel throughout the United States with their weapons on planes, etc., with their FBI counterparts.
And you needed that with the Joint Terrorist Task Force, obviously, because you guys were all over the place.
Yes. We had at times 8 to 10 major terrorist groups that we were working on that were committing all sorts of crimes, bombings, armored car robberies. I mean, you name it, they did it. And they were very, very difficult. They weren't giving us any information. They didn't leave fingerprints. They had safe houses. They had explosives. They had police credentials. They had diagrams of police stations as to where they were going to do their bombings, how they were going to shoot cops from the 4-4 precinct as they were coming out from a roll call. It was unbelievable pressure.
Reading your book, and again, it's a great read for anyone that's interested in what went on in the 70s and 80s with these radical groups, and Kevin and his gang were in the thick of things, running them down. And what became apparent to me and you guys was in 1981, where you had the Bronx armored car robbery in Nanuet, New York, where 2 cops are killed, a guard is killed. You catch some of them, I think a couple are killed, but then what you guys quickly figure out is this is a hodgepodge that all these networks deal with each other. They help each other out. They hide each other. And then once you guys start rolling with that Brinks case where you guys got involved, it became apparent that some of these guys were involved in the Scarangella and Rainey shooting, and Joanne Chesimard is involved. I just couldn't put the book down.
Vic, there were so many pieces to this thing, and as you said, the Brinks robbery in Rockland County, New York, and Nyack, the killing of a bank guard at the scene, wounding of 2 others, and the killing of a sergeant and a police officer, and a black and white police officer and sergeant were killed at the scene. They didn't care, black, white, Asian, it just didn't matter. We were law enforcement, and it really let everyone in law enforcement know, and that's what really brought people together, was that you could be in a small town in Nyack, New York, or a big city like LA or Chicago. They were killing police officers, and it was so important because there were at least 7 to 8 terrorist groups that were coming together. There were 11 people involved in the robbery of the armored car in Rockland County, and they had about 28, 30 of these armored car robberies. Some were successful, some not, but they had plans, dedicated plans as to how they were going to do it. Some of them that were supposed to be involved, when in the initial planning stages saw there was only one exit out of Rockland County over the Tappan Zee Bridge, they pulled out and didn't get involved. They were involved in everything else. There was a group that we found that were training to become further reinforcements for these terrorist groups who were actually drilling, firearms training, doing practice of tracking armored cars, and looking for how they were going to do their next set of robberies. And they were totally dedicated to killing. That's what it takes. Don't even think about it. You have to kill them. And particularly law enforcement, guards, people like that. Nobody was going to get in the way. And there were, again, whites, blacks, Puerto Ricans. I made 2 trips to Cuba, and the Cubans found out about my formerly heading up the FBI NYPD terrorist task force. And when I went to Cuba, it was a baseball game between the Orioles and the Cuban national team. They gave me a beautiful suite in a hotel. And my luggage didn't arrive from the airport for about 4 or 5 hours, and I noticed that obviously it had been gone into. I also was aware they were on my phones. I got to meet Fidel Castro, and I was working with a Cuban. He was their head of security, and believe it or not, was old enough to have been trained by the CIA when the U.S. was a friend in Cuba.
Right.
And this guy had a paranoia about the FBI and everything like that. I mean, it's a whole other story.
That sounds like a great book.
Well, it turned out the relationship between me and him, and I won't go into the whole story, but basically, I could see in our early security meetings in Cuba with the delegation from baseball, the security people were giving their own set area to work, as did the others. And we were going through all of this, and I could see I wasn't making any headway with him. He was clearly anti-American and all that kind of stuff, but he thought every security person that I would bring with me would be an FBI agent. But anyway, I said to him, I stopped the music there for a minute, and I said, you know, I am a great fan of Cuban boxers. You have some tremendous fighters here, and I'm an aficionado of boxing. And he looked at me. He says, you know about boxing? This is all through an interpreter. And I said, yes, I'm a great Cuban heavyweight.
Oh, Telefilio Stevenson.
Telefilio Stevenson, exactly. Give that man a cigar. Absolutely right. And he looked at me, you know about Telefilio? I said, oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Defeated, Olympic champion, etc. So he looked at me again through the interpreter and said, before you leave Cuba, you will meet Telefilio. And I said, oh, well, thank you. The next morning at our first meeting, we're into the meeting about 15, 20 minutes. Someone comes into the room and whispers in his ear, and he called time of the meeting, and through the interpreter directed me to go with him and the interpreter onto an elevator. We went down one floor, walked out, and who's standing there but Telefilio Stevenson? I could not believe my eyes. I walked over to him, embraced him as if, you know, he was my old friend. He was the nicest, most decent guy. We probably talked for a half hour or more, and my now colleague from the Cuban security was just watching me work, and Telefilio's reception to me and me to him. I talked about, you know, what would it be like to fight Ali, and he told me he had met with him, and he says that's what him and Ali talked about, what they would have done strategy-wise and everything. So that really broke the ice. Having, you know, the right love of boxing with my counterpart really got things rolling, and a tremendous relationship developed, and I'll close with this story. They came to the United States, they played against the Orioles, etc., etc. It was a big deal, a lot of security, and we were weeks setting it up. And like I say, me and him had gotten so close that when his boss came to the United States with him, he brought him with me, and I introduced him actually to FBI people. Anyway, the game was played, and they were supposed to go to New York the next day. They were going to be bussed down to New York from Baltimore. And at the end of the game, they said, we're leaving tonight. They had no trust in the American government and what we were going to do, and et cetera, et cetera. They said, we're leaving tonight. And they have a flight now that's leaving at 2 a.m. out to the airport. And it was kind of cold that night. And so we had to set up security at the airport. Everybody's running crazy, but we get it done. They all come out there. They board the plane, et cetera, and they're about to take the jetway, you know, the stairs going up. And next thing is this guy saying, no, wait. And he comes running down the steps of the jetway and comes running towards me. And who is it but my security chief that I've been working with for so long? And he has a bottle of Cuban rum in his hand. And we're standing out on the runway there, watching. And he runs up to me and he hands me the bottle of Cuban rum. And he gives me a hug and he says, Kevin, one day we'll be together with both our sons and be able to drink rum under a shady tree in Havana. And he runs back up on the plane. And I went to Cuba after I never saw him again. God knows what happened to him. Maybe for that act, he might have been punished. I don't know. But that's a true story.
So one terrorist organization that played to the beat of its own drum was the United Freedom Front. And they were involved in bank robberies, bombings, the murder of a New Jersey state trooper. Their leader, Raymond Levasseur, struck me as an enigma, wrapped in a riddle, because he was a Vietnam veteran,
Yes.
comes back, and then joins one of these terrorist organizations. Did you meet him or have to deal with him at all?
Raymond Levasseur. And my connection with him was when they were arrested, and they were unbelievable. They used to take their family,
Right,
and
yeah.
they'd be in a certain neighborhood, and their names would be changed. The kids would have new names before they signed up at school. They would give the kids new names, and they would grill the kids as to what their new names were. And anytime there was suspicion, they would move out. So they were really into it big time. So we have them arrested. They're into New York, and they're in the federal house of detention in New York, and they're going to be arraigned. And we knew there's going to be trouble. There's Susan Tippegrath and others that got involved with them, the attorneys. So my FBI counterpart, and I went over, or actually called the
Marshals?
marshal in charge over there at that time, and asked for a meeting with the judge who was going to handle the arraignment. And he agreed to meet with us, and we sat down and we told him that the courtroom is going to become a very dramatic scene, if you will. There's going to be actions by these people. We don't know exactly what it's going to be. Clearly, we'll make sure there's no firearms or anything like that. But they'll do something that's going to cause a big stir. He said, look, I've held so many trials. He gave us a lecture on how assured he was that security would take care of everything and he would be in charge, blah, 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 blah. So with our tail between our legs, we left. The next day, we sat with the United States Attorney at the front of the courtroom, facing the judge, and this group was brought out, and they were being arraigned. In the middle of their arraignment, they started acting crazy, screaming, yelling, jumping up and down, all kinds of crazy stuff. And the court officers went to get them, and Levasseur was a black belt and all that kind of stuff. They were being thrown, and they came out with the stun gun and ended up put him down with the stun gun once, and he jumped right back up again. They hit him a second time. Me and my agent counterpart and the United States Attorney had to get it right in front of us. This whole thing is going on. And eventually, they got him under control, the whole group. It had to be about 10 of them being arraigned at the same time. And eventually, we got control. And they were dealt with. But United Freedom Front, they were going after IBM, Honeywell, the so-called military industrial complex.
He got out. He got sentenced to 45 years, and he got out.
He is out, huh?
Yeah, he's making YouTube videos.
This was this past year, I believe it was, that Arnold Squitieri died.
Yes. Yeah, within the last year or so.
Also the...
Another great story from your book is years after the Bronx robbery, the JTTF tracks fugitives Marilyn Jean Buck and Judith Clark to a safe house on Giles Place, which is my old precinct in the Bronx. And just to give our listeners how dangerous of a woman Marilyn Jean Buck was, here's just a snippet of her criminal history. 1973, illegal arms purchase for the Black Liberation Army. 1977, escape from a West Virginia federal prison. 1978, armored car robbery at the Livingston Mall. 1979, armored car robbery at Bamberger's in Paramus, New Jersey. She acted as the getaway driver. 1979, she was the getaway driver during the escape of Joanne Chesimard from the Clinton Correctional Facility in New Jersey. Again, she's involved in the armored Brinks robbery with the murder of 2 police officers and a guard. 1983, the bombing of the U.S. Capitol and National War College. 1984, the bombing of the Washington Navy Yard in Washington, D.C., and certainly last but not least, the 1984 bombing of the South African consulate in New York City. What I find amazing, and I want you to go into how you captured her, they let her out on compassionate release just before she died. For a woman, you talk about a real badass. Can you go into that story, how you track her to Giles' place, and then how you guys caught her, and she still went out fighting?
Vic, let me tell you, you hit it right on the head. She was, I hope there isn't a Hall of Fame for criminals, but if there's a women's part of it, she's the leader of the pack. She was a University of Texas graduate. Her father was a minister, and she had this affiliation, a love apparently for these groups. Interestingly enough, she was the only woman allowed into the Black Liberation Army. They thought of her, she was really highly thought of, that she was one of them. Marilyn Jean Buck, and I'm trying to think of the woman she was with. I lost her name right now.
Judith Clark?
No, not Judy Clark. Judy Clark was part of the group, and she was involved in Brinks. But there was a woman who was in the car with her the night that we went after, that we were surveilling them.
Yeah,
Okay, the 2 women were being surveilled out of Baltimore by Baltimore FBI and their task force. We were handed off the surveillance as they were starting to come into New Jersey. And it was probably 17 or 18 hours surveillance. Now you can imagine what a toll that takes on our surveillance people. We picked up on this surveillance, and they were, as they always are, believing that they're being followed. So it's not a case of they're just driving along, cruising. They were always looking, taking exits, coming back on, coming back off. We had aerial, planes up, fixed-wing planes up, tracking all of this. They came down, and they headed towards Bedford Hills, where Judy Clark and one other were in Bedford Hills doing their time. And they kind of seemed to be surveilling Bedford Hills, okay? So they were around that area, and it was just going on and on and on. At one point in the surveillance, as good as we thought it was, we lost them. And what had happened, they were up near the Van Cortlandt Park area, et cetera, and they ducked into a road that our guys either missed the turn or whatever. But they knew they were in that area somewhere. So John Loughran, who was a sergeant, is part of the team that's out there on the surveillance. He decides to get out of the car, tells his partner, I'm going to go, I think there's a motel in that around where they made that turn.
The Van Cortlandt Park Motel.
Yeah. And the chicks with the clerk said, hey, looking for a couple of gals. Did they pop it? He said, oh, yeah, 2 signed in here about almost an hour ago. You know, you want me to come? No, that's all right. As long as they're safe, etc. And he leaves. They scout around, and they find a vehicle that they were using. We got hold of the Assistant United States Attorney Charlie Rose in New York out of the Eastern District, who was working very close with us. Charlie calls, it's the middle of the night. Now it's like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. He calls and gets a hold of the Attorney General of the United States and tells him what we're doing and what we're up to. He gets approval for a wire to be put in their car. And our special operations people in the Bureau, who were just unbelievable what they could do, they end up right out, got to the car, put a wire in the car, and disappeared. Our guys kept our distance from the car. I guess about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, the 2 broads come out, Buck and the other one, and off we go. You see those balloons?
I don't know. That's got to be the software. I have no idea why that. I'm not doing it to break
I
your
thought it
balls.
was
Trust me.
congratulations for the capture. But anyway, we go, and they're on it. Now I'm on the desk, and they get in the car and they start talking, and they're paranoid as hell. You know, a police car passes them. They're in Westchester County, and now they're trying to figure out. I can't think of the town they were close to, but there was a railroad station there. I think it was around Dobbs Ferry. Yes. So anyway, our surveillance team is right close by them. So the agents up in the plane contact me at our surveillance headquarters at 26 Federal Plaza and said they're paranoid as hell. They're going to make a break. They're going to park the car and they're going to go make a run for the train. You know, he says they're about probably, it looks like about less than a mile from the train. So something's going to go down. They're going to make a run. I said, okay, fine. So I contact our surveillance people who are on them and say, okay, you guys, when you think the timing is right, works for you, take them down. They said, fine, because that was the one thing. We never told them, all right, take them right now. We always had to wait until we were in position, that they had a safe way, they knew what they were going to do. Anyway, the car that ends up taking them down gets right up next to them. The driver is Willie Kennelly, a New York City detective who was a friend of one of the police officers that was killed, O'Grady, Sergeant O'Grady. He was a friend of his up in Rockland County.
Okay.
O'Grady was killed at Bronx, and Willie was close friends with him. Willie pulled up the car, got just behind him, jumped out of the car with a shotgun. Buck is just getting out of the car. She goes for her gun. She's got a .357.
That's Marilyn Jean Buck?
This is Marilyn Jean Buck. Marilyn Jean Buck had shot herself accidentally during the Bronx shootout with the police. She shot herself with a 9mm in the knee, okay? So this time she has a .357, fully loaded. And the other gal also had a gun. So anyway, Willie goes to grab her. She starts fighting Willie. Willie gets her by the hair and it pulls a wig off her while he's fighting her, throws her up against the car. He can't use the shotgun on her because he knows she's got going for her gun. He elbows her. He said, anyway, his agent counterpart comes running and he gets involved, and they got Buck. The other one makes a run for this restaurant that was right next to the coffee shop that was right next to the train station. She runs in there and runs into the restroom and wants to go out the window. But she's so fat she can't get, it's only a small window, and she can't get out the window. And the agents, detectives come in and they get her by the ass and pull her back and take a loaded .38 from her. When they get arrested, they're taken to our offices at 26 Federal Plaza, okay? And we bring them up, they bring them up, and I'm there with Walton, my counterpart. We go in, and we're going to, they don't tell us nothing. Okay, we separate them, et cetera, or tell us nothing. Buck is taking it all in, looking directly at us, et cetera, et cetera.
So both those women lawyered up, right? They had no interest in talking?
Okay, let me finish the story with Marilyn Jean Buck. Marilyn Jean Buck was put in the federal house of detention, okay? Susan Tippegrath went to see her immediately, and she brought in about 6 or 8 legal pads, 8 by 10 yellow sheets. Marilyn Jean Buck probably used almost all of them in writing a full story from the time they left Baltimore, the routes that they took, where they went, etc., 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 because they did stop at a safe house, which we were able to obviously go to after they were arrested. She detailed what happened at the arrest scene, how it happened, her struggle with the officer at the time of arrest, about how we caught up with the other one in the coffee shop. She described our office building, what floor she got off the elevator, what our offices looked like, what Ken Walton looked like, what Kevin Hallinan looked like, what some of the FBI and detectives that were in on the initial questioning. She described us in detail. She talked about the weapons that we had on. What
She's collecting
our
intel.
office space- I'm sorry?
She's going to jail for the rest of her life, and she's collecting intel for the cause to feed back out.
She and we didn't find out about these at this until after we had a run-in with typographed. Anyways, the pads were recovered. We couldn't believe the detail that she had captured about everything that had happened. It was like minute to minute. That was Marilyn Jean Buck. And by the way, I had 8 to 10 pictures of Marilyn Jean Buck and all her different disguises, etc., etc. And if I had run into her in the street, I wouldn't have known it was her. That's how good her disguises were. She was so dedicated. She got apartments. She got airline tickets. She got car rentals. She did so many things in taking care of these groups of people who were looking to overthrow the government and killing law enforcement. That's what Marilyn Jean Buck was. That was really, quite honestly, that was what we were up against. Their dedication was unsurpassed. We had to be equal to that, and that's what we told our Asian detectives. When those cops got blown up, detectives and the police officer at police headquarters, when we were dealing with the FALN, what I did about, I guess, 6 months after, I had the detectives from the bomb squad who were so critically injured and the police officer at headquarters and others that had been hurt by this group and had them brought over to FBI headquarters to the auditorium, and I had all my detectives and agents, and we had them there. They were in full uniform and with their injuries and all they had, and wheelchairs and crutches and everything else, and bringing home to our agents and detectives that all of us possibly could have this in our future as we continued our work against these people. And I wanted impressed upon them the dangers that we faced, that was not some movie or some Broadway play. It was real life. And these heroes were people who have made a major sacrifice to help us in this battle against these people. Vic, let me tell you something. There's a great story there, and it certainly doesn't have to be about me, but it certainly has to be about the unbelievable people, the dedication, and quite honestly, that's what this book is about. It's about all the names of the people. I got a lot of them. I wish I had gotten all of them, but what they did was unbelievable. And we did with, again, when the commissioner, Ben Ward, saw what had happened and what we did in 1985, we had locked up over 100 of these domestic terrorists and bombings, and all that stuff came to an end. We got a unit citation from NYPD at City Hall, and there's a picture, and it's in the book. We couldn't take the surveillance people and show them or anything like that, so the people had to be excluded who were involved. The commissioner could not believe when they talked after our success and said, Kevin, there's always going to be a joint terrorism task force. And he was right. The people who really deserve the credit, obvious, so many of those who got hurt, and of course, the people who gave hours and hours of their time and efforts, and the families, quite honestly, that supported them during that time.
Oh, you guys did amazing work. When I was a kid, I was following these stories when it would make the paper. And then as I got older, I would read books on it. And then, when the internet came along, then I was able to research it more. And I'm just fascinated about, you live in a bubble unless something really affects you. And I grew up in these neighborhoods and worked in these places, and I never knew some of the things that were going on right underneath my feet while you guys were out there locking up these dangerous people.
Well, what I was hoping with, but unfortunately, I guess it's not possible. I was hoping that the book, to a certain degree, would be a recruitment of people, just like I was recruited by a book, by a police officer who had an unbelievable career during the 1920s and 30s. And I thought about unbelievable challenges and rewards, quite honestly, of service that you could provide being a police officer in New York. And that's why I was hoping that young people, men and women, would get to read it and say, you know what, it's, to me, could be a worthwhile career, because it truly was. There were just so many people that gave so much, and it seems that today, for some reason, there's some reluctance to take part in public service.
I agree. The odds were always stacked against us, but nowadays they're really stacked against us. And, a lot of people don't encourage their children to go into law enforcement anymore, or they're not qualified for it. I don't know what it is, but the world has definitely changed.
Well, again, I'm kind of a glass half full guy. And I still believe that there's possibilities, because certainly when I went into law enforcement, and others, yourself included, things weren't always the best. It was always, there were so many negative things happening that you never thought that you'd get through some of it. And yet, because of good people, dedicated people, and citizens, we kind of came together and turned things around in New York, and it became probably one of, if you will, the worst of times became one of the best of times, and it made, obviously, for a good life for all of us. I still want to be part of that positivity and to have people believe in this country and what we're about and what we can be and our potential, because this isn't supposed to be heaven. So
True.
We have to keep working at it, and hopefully, when our day is finished here, that we can look back and say, hey, look, we tried, and we had some wonderful people that tried with us, and it made for a good life.
For me, it certainly has. Kevin, I can't thank you enough for the autographed copy of the book, and I can't thank you enough for doing this interview. I really appreciate it.
Vic, hey, listen, I appreciate it, going back in time and getting to identify so many different people that gave so much and didn't necessarily get the credit. And I am hoping that the book, I got to deal with wives and daughters that a number of them have passed on, and I wanted to make sure that they knew their name was in that book because of who they were. And again, not that credit, it's all that important, but to me, I realized the stresses that they were under, and there was no quit, and that their family should realize the sacrifices that these folks made.
Absolutely. Folks, if you love true crime, this book is for you. It's got everything: drug wars, homicides, terrorist organizations, hunting fugitives, and of course, great stories from the New York City Police Department. So please pick up a copy of Kevin Hadlin's book, Over the Wall, From Dangerous Streets of New York City Through the Birth of Counterterrorism and Beyond. Again, it's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and where other great books are sold. It's a great read. It should be made into a movie. If I had any say in it, it certainly would. Again, Kevin, I want to thank you.
Vic, thank you.
And I also want to thank everyone for tuning in, especially my friends in Indianapolis, Chicago, Lawrenceburg, Indiana, Miami, Florida, Nanuet, New York, Myerstown, Pennsylvania, and Clarks Summit, Pennsylvania. If you work in law enforcement or have an interesting criminal background and would like to be a guest on the show, please reach out to me on Twitter or Instagram @VicFerrari50. Again, be sure to check out Kevin Hanlon's book, Over the Wall, From the Dangerous Streets of New York City Through the Birth of Counterterrorism and Beyond. It's available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and I'll have another episode out next week.